Well, thank you for the invitation to participate today. I want to say that this paper is co-authored by my colleague Øystein LaBianca, who's in Jordan as we speak. And I regret that I don't have any nice pictures to go with my talk. The story of Sihon, king of Heshbon, emerges from the ancient landscape of Transjordan as a blend of historical memory, tradition, and cultural identity. Mentioned extensively in the Hebrew Bible, Sihon's confrontation with the Israelites has long shaped the perception of Heshbon as a place of conflict, conquest, and divine intervention. Yet when the Heshbon expedition explored Tel Heshbon, an excavation that I led with Siegfried Horn, the material evidence for the specific biblical event was elusive, raising profound questions about how history and narrative intertwine. The archaeological excavation results for Tel Heshbon have all been published in a series of preliminary reports as well as so-called final volumes, and are too well known to be repeated here. Suffice it to say that the literary and archaeological data correlate well, both for the geographical location for the site as well as the nature of its occupation for just about every period till we get back to the earliest period. The only substantive non-correlating data appear to be the biblical allusions to the date, nature, and location of Sihon's Amorite capital, and the archaeological evidence that human occupation at Tel Heshbon did not antedate around 1200 BCE. According to the biblical narrative, Sihon ruled over Heshbon as an Amorite king who refused the Israelites safe passage during the migration from Egypt. This defiance led to a climatic battle in which the Israelites, under Moses' leadership, defeated Sihon, claiming his city and territory. The story served not only as a historical claim, but also as a theological assertion of divine providence, reinforcing the Israelites' entitlement to the land. The biblical narrative of King Sihon and the Amorites is central to Israelites' early history. Israel had been forbidden from attacking Edomites and Moabites due to kinship ties, but Sihon had previously conquered Moabite lands, according to Numbers 21, providing a theological workaround. By defeating Sihon, Israel could claim land without violating divine prohibitions that are found in Deuteronomy 2 and Numbers 21. This conquest established Israelite territorial claims before entering Canaan and reinforced the belief that their land inheritance was divinely sanctioned, Deuteronomy and Joshua. This rhetorical strategy reflects a broader tendency in biblical historiography to reinterpret past conflicts in ways that align with later political realities. In this case, the conquest of Sihon provided a theological and legal framework for Israelite claims over key regions of Transjordan, reinforcing the idea that Israel's expansion was divinely sanctioned rather than an act of aggression against related peoples. The defensive advantage of Heshbon. Although there is no direct archaeological evidence of Amorites or King Sihon at Tel Heshbon, the site's strategic hilltop location makes it a compelling candidate for situating the biblical memory of the Sihon story. Heshbon's elevated position provided a natural defensive advantage, making it a prime location for those seeking to control movement along key trade routes and water sources. The defensive affordances of the site suggested it was a place where local groups could consolidate power in response to shifting political pressures, a pattern reflected in biblical accounts of conflicts in the region. The biblical tradition, Numbers 21, Deuteronomy 2, portrays Sihon as a powerful Amorite king who controlled a territory stretching from the Arnon River to the Jabbok. While material evidence for an Amorite stronghold at Heshbon remains elusive, its strategic placement within a contested frontier zone aligns with the historical reality of shifting alliances and territorial struggles in the late Bronze and early Iron Ages. So Heshbon's role as a fortified highland settlement within this volatile landscape lends credence to its inclusion in later Israelite narratives of conquest and territorial expansion. I might say that I'm aware that yesterday's speaker, Deborah Hearn, has a different candidate for Heshbon, believing that another site in the Mishor, Tel el-Meri, another site that I excavated, is a better candidate for Heshbon. Now, Heshbon within Burke's Arc of Uncertainty and the Amorite Koine. Aaron Burke's concept of the Arc of Uncertainty offers a useful framework for understanding the geopolitical realities in which Sihon's people may have operated. This arc, a frontier zone where settled agricultural societies met semi-nomadic pastoralists, was characterized by fluctuating boundaries, environmental stress, and political instability. Heshbon, located within this transitional space, was likely part of a network of settlements that navigated these uncertainties through a mix of subsistence strategies, including agriculture, herding, and trade. Burke's notion of a koine, a shared cultural and economic framework among Amorite groups, further suggests that Heshbon was not necessarily the center of a centralized Amorite kingdom, but rather part of a broader coalition of local groups adapting to shifting power dynamics. Rather than envisioning Sihon as the ruler of a grand unified state, it is more plausible to see him as a leader who briefly consolidated power among these factions, capitalizing on Heshbon's defensive strengths and its location within a dynamic frontier zone. Invisible people and the archaeological challenge. The absence of definitive material evidence for Amorites at Heshbon reflects a broader archaeological challenge. The difficulty of identifying societies that operated outside the dominant material signatures typically used to define ancient policies. The Amorites, as described in textual sources, were a mobile and fragmented people whose political structures may have left the kinds of architectural and ceramic markers associated with more centralized state formations. While Heshbon's archaeological record lacks clear Amorite material culture, it does reveal evidence of defensive concerns, multi-ethnic interaction, and engagement with broader trade and political networks. These findings suggest that Heshbon was a contested and strategically significant site, even if it did not serve as a formal capital in the way some interpreters of biblical tradition imply. Given its location within the Arc of Uncertainty and its strategic role in regional power struggles, Heshbon remains a strong candidate for the kinds of conflicts and territorial negotiations that later crystallized into the biblical memory of Sihon and his Amorite militia. Biblical narratives often highlight kings, cities, and military conquests, while rendering invisible the experiences of non-elite populations, pastoralists, traders, fugitives, and other marginalized groups. Yet traces of these invisible people appear in stories of resistance and survival outside the urban framework. For instance, the Rechabites in Jeremiah 35 are portrayed as a group that deliberately rejected urbanization, maintaining a nomadic lifestyle as a means of resilience and identity preservation. Similarly, David's time in the wilderness, 1 Samuel 22, illustrates how bands of outcasts, fugitives, and disaffected individuals could form viable communities beyond state-controlled centers. Even the Israelites, before entering Canaan, are described as a semi-nomadic people relying on mobility and divine guidance rather than fortified cities. These examples challenge the traditional assumption that power and legitimacy were always tied to city-based rule. Instead, they suggest that political and economic influence could also be exerted through networks of mobile communities, seasonal settlements, and informal alliances. In Sihon's case, rather than ruling from a grand Amorite capital, he may have commanded authority through a coalition of pastoralist groups, smaller settlements, and control of strategic resources such as water and trade routes. By acknowledging the role of these invisible populations, we move beyond a city-centered perspective and gain a full understanding of ancient social dynamics. This approach not only provides a more plausible historical reconstruction of Sihon's influence, but also aligns with a broader view of life in the ancient Near East, where the majority of people lived outside walled cities, negotiating power and survival in ways that traditional archaeological methods have often overlooked. The broader implications of the Sihon narrative, cultural memory, and storytelling. The persistence of the Sihon story in biblical tradition underscores the power of cultural memory in shaping historical consciousness. The endurance of the narrative suggests that stories of conquest and divine favor played a crucial role in reinforcing group identity and legitimizing territorial control. The repetition of Sihon's defeat across multiple biblical texts highlights its significance in establishing a framework for Israelite expansion and justifying divine mandate. The fact that Heshbon continues to be referenced in later periods, despite changes in political control and settlement patterns, demonstrates the lasting impact of these narratives in structuring perceptions of land and belonging. The story of Sihon, king of Heshbon, did not remain confined to the biblical text in which it first appeared. It played a vital role in shaping ancient identity, serving as both a cultural memory and a political tool for the Israelites. By recounting the defeat of a powerful Amorite king, the narrative reinforced the idea of divine favor, presenting the Israelites as a people chosen for conquest and land inheritance. During the Iron Age, stories of conquest were often tied to claims of land ownership and divine authority. The biblical authors may have employed the story of Sihon not only as a record of historical events, but as a means to unite disparate tribal groups under a shared identity rooted in divine victory. Heshbon's location on the Madba Plains further amplified the symbolic power of the story. Situated along key trade routes and fertile lands, it embodied the wealth and strategic importance often associated with biblical conquests. The fact that the site was remembered in ancient texts, despite the lack of extensive urbanization, underscores how symbolic landscapes can shape historical consciousness more powerfully than physical evidence alone. The narrative of King Sihon and his defeat at Heshbon serves as a profound example of how storytelling shapes historical consciousness, national identity, and moral lessons across generations. While the absence of definitive physical evidence at Tel Heshbon raises questions about understanding of the historical accuracy of the biblical account, the persistence of the story across millennia reveals the profound power of cultural memory. Cultural memory is not merely a record of events, but a framework through which societies interpret their past, define their present, and project their future. In the case of Sihon, his defeat symbolized the triumph of divine justice, reinforcing the Israelites' sense of a chosenness and moral authority. The narrative's repetition in Psalms and prophetic literature further solidified its role as a moral and spiritual touchstone. The biblical portrayal of Sihon's conquest has had enduring political implications. Scholars such as Rachel Haverlock argue that modern territorial disputes in the Levant echo the logic of biblical land claims, where conquest narratives are invoked to justify historical rights. Just as the Sihon story framed Israelite expansion as divine sanctioned, similar narratives have been used to support contemporary geopolitical claims. At Tel Heshbon, the excavation itself became a site of contested histories. While early Western archaeologists sought to confirm biblical events, Jordanian scholars and local communities offered alternative perspectives. The shift toward community archaeology and the renewed work of Heshbon, led by Øystein LaBianca and Bethany Walker, has helped bridge these narratives, emphasizing Tel Heshbon's long-term history rather than a singular biblical moment. By integrating diverse perspectives, archaeologists and historians can move beyond traditional conquest narratives to develop a more nuanced understanding of the region's past. The enduring legacy of the Sihon narrative and its impact on archaeological research. The Sihon narrative, embedded in biblical tradition and reinforced through centuries of cultural memory, has had a profound influence on how the past is interpreted and reconstructed. While the absence of definitive material evidence for King Sihon at Heshbon challenges some literal readings of the biblical account, the story's endurance underscores the power of historical storytelling in shaping perceptions of land, identity, and divine mandate. The resilience of the Sihon narrative illustrates how historical consciousness is often more rooted in collective memory than in the physical remnants of the past. The original Heshbon expedition, which set out to investigate the biblical account, found that the archaeological record did not align neatly with our traditional understanding of the biblical portrayal of a grand Amorite kingdom under Sihon. This discrepancy led researchers to broaden their focus, shifting from an exclusive concern with biblical validation to a more nuanced exploration of the site's long-term historical and cultural significance. Rather than seeking confirmation of a single moment in biblical history, scholars began to examine Heshbon as part of a broader landscape of shifting political, economic, and environmental dynamics. This evolution in research focus continued with the Madaba Plains project, which expanded the investigative framework to include long-term settlement patterns, ecological adaptations, and the interactions of various communities over millennia. The concept of Heshbon as a contested and strategic highland site, rather than a fixed Amorite capital, led to a reassessment of how power and authority functioned in the ancient Near East. Scholars increasingly recognized that the absence of traditional urban markers did not negate the site's significance, but instead pointed to alternative forms of political organization such as pastoralist networks and shifting coalitions. The integration of community archaeology further transformed the research agenda, bringing in local Jordanian perspectives and emphasizing the role of Heshbon not just as a biblical site, but as a living cultural landscape with a history that extends well beyond the Iron Age. This approach helped reframe the narrative, moving away from a single conquest story to a broader understanding of how the region's inhabitants, whether Amorite, Moabite, Israelite, or later peoples, negotiated their place in a complex and changing environment. Ultimately, the story of Sihon and Heshbon exemplifies the enduring power of cultural memory to shape historical inquiry. What began as an effort to locate a biblical battle evolved into a multidisciplinary investigation that has enriched our understanding of the ancient Near East. The Sihon narrative, even in the absence of definitive archaeological corroboration, continues to influence research by prompting new questions about mobility, identity, and political authority in frontier zones. In this case, our region seemed to have moved from its Ammonite period to its Amorite period, and then to its Israelite period before moving back to another Ammonite, if not Moabite, period. It reminds us that archaeology does not merely confirm or refute textual traditions, but offers a deeper, more layered perspective on how societies remember, adapt, and reimagine their past. Thank you.